What's up, everybody? The wait is finally over and totally over. Left at Wall is available now, right now. You can get Left at Wall on Apple TV, Google Play, YouTube Movies. You can get it on demand. You can buy it on DVD. The wait is totally over. Just type in Left at Wall on your search bar on your smart TV, and you can find a bunch of ways to get it. You can watch it now. Again, that's Left at Wall, wherever you get your movies. Episode 73, Sam Richard. Sam Richard is a writer, editor, and publisher. He is the original editor and current operator of Weirdpunk Books, a publisher in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I found out about him online. Wait, a punk rock horror publisher that's unapologetically leftist, queer, and DIY? In the Twin Cities, no less? Yes, I'm in. Sam runs a great publishing house, and he's got quite the story. Please welcome to the show, Sam Richard. Sam Richard, good to talk to you, man. Good to know you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Absolutely. So I kind of want to start a little bit at the beginning. Are you from Minneapolis?
Yeah, I'm from the Twin Cities. My parents were divorced when I was like 9 months old. And my dad lived in Minneapolis and my mom in St. Paul. So like both.
It's one of my favorite cities. I don't know if I could necessarily say Minneapolis or St. Paul. I mean, I kind of just, loop them together, but it's one of my favorite towns. Like I always just think about moving there every time I'm there.
Yeah, I was really curious when you had brought that up. Like, I was wondering what your connection was. Like, does he live here? Has he lived here? I just didn't know.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to love, as I'm sure you'd agree. But also, I had been there once as a kid randomly, and it was when I was too young to really appreciate it. It just looked like another Midwestern city,
Cool.
But then when I started coming as an adult, it was mostly for shows, comedy, and stuff like that. And yeah, I fell in love with the city that way. I mean, it's one of the best comedy towns there is. It's one of my favorite places in the States to perform.
Yeah.
And it's just great for everything else I like too. I mean, the music out of Minneapolis and the literary scene in Minneapolis and, everything. So some of my favorite record stores are in Minneapolis. It's a great place to eat. Y'all don't have the ocean, but you have enough lakes that it makes up for it.
Yeah, we really do. And we have more, I don't know, compared to every major city, or I don't even know if Minneapolis is considered a major city. Probably not, but we have more green space than like overwhelmingly than most, like within the limits of the city, much less if you're talking like get a little far out. Like there's so much green here too.
As time goes on for a number of reasons, I mean, the big thing that keeps me away is the winters, which maybe that will be one of the few lemonade of lemons moments in climate change. Like I'll just move to Minneapolis because, as time goes on, part of me thinks if I'm going to be in the States, maybe I want to live in a place where a bunch of people one day decided, fuck it, we're joining Canada.
Right.
What kind of came first for you as far as what you started getting into? Like, did you gravitate towards horror or was it punk rock music? Like how did you kind of eventually land where you're at?
Both really, but I think it probably started with horror just because my dad didn't really give a shit what we watched, to like maybe a reckless degree. So I remember being really young, and the first horror movie I remember watching was the Universal Horror Dracula on like a red shelled VHS that he owned, and I didn't know. I mean, I think I had a scope for what Dracula was, what vampires were, but I just recall like for a couple of years leading up to that, seeing that VHS in like the shelf that he had, like TV stand with like you pop open the doors and there's shelves in there just with VHS. And I always remember just that shell and being like, that movie, whatever that is, that movie's terrifying. And then watching it and being like, oh my God, this is fantastic. I mean, I didn't have the words for it at that age. I was probably like 5, maybe 6. I was really young. And then from there, it just cascaded into other. I remember he was the person who showed me the first Evil Dead movie. Like, he liked those. And then that sort of seeded a love of the genre that extended, you know, into like with my siblings of all just being like, we would be at the video store and there was really no rule about what we could or couldn't rent. And so it was like, I don't know, like, this one looks crazy. This one looks crazy. Look at the box on this one. Sometimes not even knowing what we were renting. And sometimes renting some real duds, but also, you know, seeing all the classics at that age, at like a really young age. And I was like terrified of them, but I also loved it. It was like, while watching it, I was stoked and scared. And then going to bed, I wouldn't be able to sleep because it was just like, oh my God, like, things are in every corner. Things are in my dreams. Things are skulking in the yard. Like, it would really fuck me up, but I still loved it and was always drawn to it. And it's like with great contrast to my mom, I grew up in at her house, like an insanely religious, like Pentecostal level, like religious environment where everything was hyper restrictive. And, you know, like my Amazing Spider-Man comics with MODOK on them were like too weird and out there for her. And they would go missing. It was like, 'cause she would throw them out and not tell me. But so it was definitely horror was the first love. But when I was a little older, I was like maybe 9, 8. I have these really distinct memories of being at my dad's house when he moved in with who would be for several years, my stepmom. Her backyard of her house, like my stepbrother's room was like faced the back. The window looked out over the alley, over their backyard in the alley. And on the other side of the alley was a VFW hall. And I would lay, again, not sleeping, like the brain just going and going and going, but I would see bar close, 2:00, whatever. All of these people would file out of the VFW, not even really hall. It was a really small building, so really just bar. All these people would file out, and there was always this contingent of like Dayglow punks. And I was like, I don't know what that is. It was like 8. Like, I don't know what that is, but I love it and I want to be that.
Oh, wow.
So
you literally saw the kids coming out of the shows and you were like, That's got to be me.
Yeah, like whatever that is, I love it. And I'm being exposed to that stuff in movies or whatever too, TV shows, just being like, I don't know what that is, but that's like, I want to be that. And then getting a little older and hearing the music, and the two, like horror and punk, weren't super tied together for me for a while, until obviously then you hear Misfits or realize like, oh wait, like a lot of what these get a little older, and like a lot of what these directors are doing is like saying things. It's subversive. It has a perspective, be it like anti-consumerist or anti-war or whatever. Like a lot of those films have a subtext that you're not reading when you're 8.
Right.
But, you know, I'm turning like 15, 16, starting to read a lot of stuff, trying to understand and going like, oh wait, like this is coming from a similar perspective, just through a different medium. Obviously not entirely, but like some of those films are. And then trying to like put those pieces together, you know, like, oh, these things are very part and parcel to each other in a weird way.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, that's part of the beauty of all of it. So for anyone not in the know, give the skinny on Weirdpunk Books, other than, by the way, perfect name for a freaking publisher. Like they're like, dude, if there was ever such a contest, you've won. That's perfect name for a publisher. But yeah, give me a brief history there.
What's funny is I didn't even come up with that name. I can't take credit for it. Weirdpunk Books was founded, I guess, officially 2014, with the first book in 2015 by my still very close friend, Emma Alice Johnson. I put out a book of hers this year called Love Skull. But she started Weirdpunk with the intention of releasing, originally at least, the focus was anthologies where punk and weird fiction collide, and like expansive weird fiction. So horror, weird lit, bizarro, strange stuff in general. And the first few projects were all very punk music forward. So the first book was a literary tribute to Gigi Allen. Now I'm a like lefty anarchist punk. I fucking like hate Gigi Allen. But her appeal to me, she was like, I'm going to do this project. Do you want to come co-edit it with me? And her appeal was like, maybe Gigi Allen, like fuck Gigi Allen, but maybe he just wasn't right for this world. And we'll ask writers to write worlds in which he is fit for. So all of the stories included him. They were all stories.
I don't know if I want to go to that world.
Yeah, I don't. And the stories we got are a real broad interpretation of that idea. But yeah, that was just her first idea. She's like, I'm going to start a publishing house and I'm going to do this book. Do you want to co-edit it with me? And it was like, sure. Like at that point, I'd been writing for years, and I'd written some nonfiction stuff, and I'd been writing fiction, but I'd never been published. I'd never tried to get published, other than like zines and stuff. And I was like, sure, I'll come along for this ride, and kind of learned the ropes of publishing through that. And then the next year, while we were doing that project, she was like, we're never doing this again. It's so much work. It's so expensive. It's so stressful. And then literally like the day we got done packing orders, she was like, so I'm thinking about next year. What do you want to do? Yeah. And she had the idea for the second book, which was Hybrid Moments, a literary tribute to the Misfits. And that one's not like put the Misfits in stories. It's short stories influenced by Misfit songs, and specifically Misfit songs that aren't already they themselves influenced by horror movies, or at least overtly influenced by horror movies. And so we did that. She put out another book of her own that's like fake background and reviews of like B horror movies that none of them exist, but she like approached it and marketed it as though it's like this super obscure list. And then we were getting ready to do the third, or like our third together book, which was Zombie Punks Fuck Off. And that was kind of coming together in 2017. She was like, I'm just going to publish it. You edit it. You find all the stories. You deal with all that stuff. And I'll just do all the publishing side work. And during that, like I had all the stories. I think the art was done. It needed to be edited. People needed to be paid other than the artist, like because you pay after you edit. So you're getting, reflective of the correct word count. And then during kind of that time was when my wife died, and it was sudden. She wasn't sick. It was just, she just died at work one day. And I obviously didn't like, what do I do? Like my entire life was like destroyed in that moment. Like hyperbole, like my wife was my favorite person on earth. Like my wife was a fucking incredible human, and we were very close. And obviously this anthology I'm working on is the least important thing in the world at that moment.
Right.
But also my wife was my biggest supporter as a writer in Weirdpunk and just my own work, which I had started to get stuff published elsewhere. Was working on longer form stuff. And I kind of knew I had it like itching at the back of my head. Like I couldn't just let this be the end of this anthology. She would want it to be out in the world. Obviously the writers like deserve to see it happen. And they were all obviously like very gracious and understanding about what I was going through. But I like, she would want it to be out. So I took about a year. She died in 2017 in August. I think around the time that I hit the 1 year mark of her death, 2018, I went to Emma and was like, hey, like, I think I'm ready to put the time and effort into this. Obviously, everything's still smoldering rubble around me, but like I'm trying to piece together my life. And it's important to me that this see the light of day because she would want that. And Emma was like, okay, sounds cool. So actually, I'm kind of good on the publishing end of things. Like, this has been really fun and I've really enjoyed it, but I'm just I just want to do different things. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of stress. It's a lot of money, and it's been great. But do you just want weird punk? And I took a beat and thought about it. And it was one of those moments that, I don't know, for me, that like I had in my life of going, I don't even necessarily know with like certainty, with any kind of certainty, that I want to take this on, but I also can't let it die. And the irony is that I had been thinking for a couple years about like, well, Emma's doing this thing and I'm doing it with her, but it's not my thing. And I'm not directing, where it goes. It's all very punk forward, which is great. But I'm more concerned with punk as like an ethos than an aesthetic. And then I know she's into that too, but like with the books, it was all very punk forward aesthetically. And I was just getting a little bored of that. So I've been thinking about like, oh, maybe I'll start my own small thing of like doing limited runs of chapbooks or whatever. And she gives me this offer, like, do you want to take it? And I took about a day and I decided it was too good to just say, like, to let die. Because I didn't think that she would just give it to someone else. I thought that if I didn't take it, it would go away. And I didn't want all of that work and time and like potential to disappear. And maybe she would have given it to someone else, but she was like, you're the only person it makes sense to give it to. She could have probably sold it to someone. So maybe that would have happened. But I felt too invested in just letting it go. And so I took it, and suddenly I'm in charge of like, I don't know how to do the back end stuff for publishing. I don't know how to format books. I don't know how to upload files. I don't know how to do templates for for the printers and distributors. I don't know any of this. So I'm like, crash course, how do I learn how to do this? And I reached out to another publisher who I was friends with, Clash Books, Christoph Paul. And I hit him up and I was like, hey, I have this project. It's done. Like, it is entirely done. I have paid for the art. The stories have now all been edited. I just need to pay the authors and figure out all of that back end stuff. And I don't want to keep delaying it because everybody's waited so long, and it's important. It's like this pressure that I'm feeling on my chest of like, I just need to get this out so that I can start working on other things that I didn't have on the docket before she died. So I can work on things that are like relevant more to what I'm going through now. And I was like, I just need to get it out. And he was like, we talked back and forth, and I was like, what if we just you pay the authors, I've paid the art, we're in about the same amount of money. You utilize, all of the infrastructure back end that you have, you put it out and you pay me royalties on it. And he was like, done. And so it came out in 2018, like right around Halloween, like in October or something. It all moved really fast. But then where that left me was like, I had already had this inclination that like, if I'm going to do Weirdpunk, that part of Weirdpunk's history where it's punk forward stuff is like over. Like, I love that era. That era is where the press started. It's what, it's the original vision, but that's not my vision. That was Emma's vision. And so the next project, I was like, well, I'll just do more of the same, which is just another anthology the following year. And one of my closest friends who I've made from writing is Brendan Vedito. I published one of his books, Pornography for the End of the World. He's an amazing person, an amazing writer. And literally the weekend we met, we were like, why has nobody done a David Cronenberg tribute anthology? Because there was a David Lynch one that Lazy Fascist had put out in like 2015 or so, and 2014 maybe. And we were like, somebody needs to do a Cronenberg one. And if we don't do it, someone's going to do it before us. And so I had already had previously, in that time that we had met, which was like years prior, talked with Emma about it. And she's like, yeah, this isn't really like the direction I want to go with Weirdpunk. I'm like, that's cool. Maybe we'll do this sometime on our own or whatever if I start this other thing. And then I'm like, well, now I have Weirdpunk. The punk forward era of Weirdpunk is done. Fuck it, let's do the Cronenberg tribute. So I hit up Brendan and talked to him about it, and we decided what we wanted, brought him on as co-editor. And that was kind of the turning point for the press of being, now it's more about like my vision for it, which is, again, the ethos of the press itself, the way I operate it, the spirit in which it exists, and the way that I interact and treat the writers and artists and everyone I work with. And then like, that's the punk part, as well as that I think not exclusively, but a lot of the books have, you know, a subtext to them or a spirit within them of kind of leftisty, definitely a lot of queer writers. I mean, I myself am queer, so like, it's important that, again, not exclusively queer writers, but a lot of queer writers, a lot of queer perspectives, a lot of leftist perspectives, anti-authoritarian, anti-religious perspectives throughout the work, anti-capitalist perspectives. Like, again, it's not like the ultimate goal that every book have that, but, you know, some of them do, and some of them always will, because I'm drawn to that stuff. And so that kind of became what the punk in Weirdpunk means. And that Cronenberg book was like ultimately the turning point towards that. And that came out in 2019, which, like, sidebar, that came out the same month as the original version of my first book. And my wife at the time of her death had been working on a tarot deck, and it was unfinished. So I got, me and my sister and a really close friend of Mo's, got together a bunch of other artists. My wife was a tattoo artist, and so we got together like a bunch of friends and family, many of whom were professional artists, tattoo or otherwise, but a bunch of whom aren't professional artists. And we finished the deck using some unifying elements in her notes that she had. And that also came out. All of those came out in either September or October of 2019. Wow. And my first book is like entirely about my wife dying. Like, it's all short. It's short horror stories, To Wallow in Ash and Other Sorrows. But it is entirely, every story except for one was written in like the 2 years after her death, and are all about me processing her death. So all of that like dropped in like 1 month. And I was basically, I feel like I was like, obviously still reeling from her death, still am, but like, I was like catatonic after that. I had no creative energy. I had nothing to give for a while. So I didn't do anything for a bit.
Well, did that help you get through though? I mean, just diving into that creativity, like, did that pull you through?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a few things that I've often cited as like being why I'm still here. And writing that book was one of them. Also, like, a lot of friends really helped, and family. Like, my sister is a fucking saint who like really helped keep me alive. My dad as well. And then my dog, who has been dead for now like 4 years, but like, ultimately it's a lot of like my dog kept me alive, but all of those forces and having a place to pour all of that trauma into with like a creative outlet, absolutely kept me alive. And it really is a thing of, I realized, so the two of the stories in that book, I wrote like day 16 and day 17 after she died. Like, I wrapped one and immediately started writing the next. They're entirely different stories. But it was like this almost religious kind of purge. Like, I needed to get it out. And as I was writing those, I suddenly became so aware that, like, I'm not saying I'm like some great writer, but I had been writing enough and long enough that I knew I could just do it. And I really felt like, had I not had that, like, I probably it would have been, maybe not, I wouldn't have survived, but it would have been so much harder, because I had this outlet that I was already like so established in and familiar with and comfortable with, that at least for those first two stories, there was no real sense of frustration, which I am prone to as a writer. It was just literally like these parts of me were like pouring onto the page, and it was like this necessary purge. And then when those two got done, I didn't write for 6 months again, because I was like, I would get it like frozen by it. But all of that, like, and doing the tarot project too, was this thing where I was like, I can't let this sit here. I can't let this work that meant so much to her go unfinished and go unreleased. So we did a Kickstarter for it and raised like 25 grand or something, some insane amount of money, like selling the decks, basically pre-order decks. And I still have a few, like I sell them on the website. I still have a few cases left. But that was this thing that was like, felt super important. And that was like from the day she died almost, it was like, we talked about a few weeks later or whatever, it became something that I talked with my sister about, and Bambi, who is Mo's really good friend who she worked with. And like, this is something we're going to need to do. And they got the ball rolling, and then it would have these fits. And actually, I realized my sister didn't come in until later. She stepped in to help save the project because we were both reeling from, and she was as well, but like, she's very task minded. And I was like, I'm too inside this to like be sending emails to artists asking where their art is. You know, I can do it, but it'll take me 3 months to get there. And my sister came in and kind of project managed it for us. And it ended up coming out, like I said, like in 2019, but it sat in, again, kind of partially done for like a year, just because we were all like, I don't know how to proceed with anything in my life, much less like do a task that's like, has this much of an undertaking that needs to be done behind it. Yeah. So but all of those things contributed to, like, if nothing else, survival, and like getting rid of a little bit of that like poison pit in my stomach that like sits there, you know, just like letting a little bit of that out at a time, through like really good things, or what I hope will be really good things, but like a positive thing to be like, oh, we like made this happen.
Oh, that's heavy, man. And yeah, condolences again. I mean, that's, I can only imagine what that's like. And yeah, that's really freaking powerful that you know, were able to just get through that and were able to just kind of dive into the art and then just catch your breath, really.
Yeah. It's weird because it's kind of always continued to be like that, where I'll go through these phases where I'll write a bunch. And even if I'm not like the stuff that I'm writing now, there's certainly widow narratives, lost narratives. But I'm less frozen in that, like, every story is about someone who's lost someone type of thing. There's a lot of like Tuwalo specifically, I would kind of describe to people as like mostly stories about people grieving incorrectly. It's like I don't know, like grief horror is a term that some people like and some people don't, but it's one of those things where it's like, for me, it's not about, oh, the monster is the symbol for the grief or whatever. Like, I don't fuck with that. It's like, for me, the grief is the horror, but also it's where it leads people. If because it's oblivion is so easy to let yourself fall into and be pulled, especially in those early days when you're in shock. I can really see now how easily religious movements manipulate grieving people. It was very aware of that from my childhood, right? But like, I mean, the first handful of weeks after my wife died, there was a lot of like, okay, you go sit here, or like, we're gonna come with, these are my family. This isn't like not being manipulated, but like the way when you're in deep shock from trauma like that, the way that you're malleable to other people. And this was all good. It was like they were trying to keep me alive. So I wasn't alone for the first 4 days or something. Like, I was entirely never alone, because I think everyone was worried, rightfully so, that I was going to kill myself. But the way that you just like, you kind of are just floating, and then like an arm or a word, like somebody talking, like guides you to a place, because your faculties aren't all like processing with, criticism and like thoughts of your own. You're just this thing almost. At least that's how it was for me. So I wrote a lot, and that first book is like people in that space, even if they're not led by someone else, like finding themselves going down these horrible ways not to grieve, that mostly become some kind of horrific eldritch thing, or whatever, or some kind of body horror scenario.
Sure.
But yeah, it's I don't know, grief's a fucker. Yeah.
So
kind of trailed out.
no, it's cool. I have you seen and this is I'll give a quick disclaimer. I am separating the art from the artist here when I ask this question. Have you seen Afterlife?
No.
I loved it a lot, actually. I thought it was a brilliant series. And Ricky Gervais has kind of said and done some douchey things over recent years, but that series I thought was just genius.
Okay.
And I liked it a lot. Yeah. I'd be, if you ever watch it, I'd be curious what you think of it, having gone through what you've gone through.
Yeah. I'll look it up. I'm definitely not super stoked on him in general. So.
No. I totally get it. That's why, that disclaimer was there. I mean, I've never really enjoyed his stand-up much, but some of his writing, I mean, I thought Extras was hilarious.
Yeah, there's some great stuff in that.
And obviously The Office.
Yeah.
And then Afterlife, I was just really, Afterlife, when I watched that, I was like, oh, fuck. Like it kind of like lit a fire under me as a writer, like, oh, shit. It was, so I'd be curious what you think of it, having lived.
You'll have to check that out.
So I spent some time in publishing. It was actually the first thing I got into as I was getting ready to graduate college. I wrote press releases for a small publishing house for beer money. Then upon graduation, I was like, I wonder if there's a job in this. And so I dove into it, and I started, and then I moved up to Seattle, and I'm curious. It seems like your experience in the indie publishing world has been a kind of positive one. When I was up in Seattle, I kind of got chased off from it because a lot of people were not very nice. I mean, I was a guy, I was in my early 20s, just like starry-eyed, not even starry-eyed, but just, I guess, maybe wide-eyed kid. And people were just kind of shitty. And so I wonder, what has your experience been as an indie publisher, and also as an indie publisher without, like you said, you didn't have that traditional publishing experience when you just got, when you fell into it.
Yeah, it's also different because I was, so Weirdpunk will technically, from the day Emma conceived the idea and talked to me, like I said, 2014. So it's 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. I was 34. No, I was 32, not 35. I was 32. So I wasn't a bright-eyed post-college 21-year-old. I was a guy who played in a bunch of bands and worked a ton of real shit jobs. And I think coming into it, and especially at that point, when she brought me in, my expectation was, I don't even know how we do this. I just love to write and love to read, and have a kind of a perspective on literature and art that I think that's why she asked. She was, asked me to do this with her. But in terms of my experience, it's just very, honestly, it's all over the map. I've made some, what I imagine will be lifelong friendships through writing and publishing. People who I feel even people who were there for me when my wife died, friends who, some of whom aren't even writing anymore, but who I met through this, who will, some of my favorite people in the world who I will, hope will always maintain these friendships with as they ebb and flow as time goes on. But I'm also I've dealt with a lot of assholes too.
I'd imagine, yeah.
I don't feel like I ever got chased out of anywhere, but it's interesting because I feel like horror is such a bastard genre, and it's a thing that a lot of people turn their nose to, which is fine. Whatever anybody's into, that's fine. But it comes part and parcel with being a punk too, because it's also a bastard genre, especially if we're talking like kind of the DIY underground shit. It's largely ignored and largely maligned. And I'm also I'm a metalhead, so more of the same. And I love the intersection of those two genres in a lot of respects, not all. But I feel like that's I was already primed to be into and already well into the things that no one gives a fuck about. And it's been really interesting within the horror publishing sphere is a continual reminder that a lot of, and again, I'm not trying to talk shit, whatever people are into is fine, but the continual reminder that I have to keep drilling into my own brain is how artistically conservative, not necessarily politically conservative, but how artistically conservative a lot of horror fans are. They want the genre to be one specific thing, and they read the books or whatever amount of specific things, these kind of story types, and they don't want anything that is different than that. It can be a spin on that. It can be a new version of telling that story. But if it gets too weird or too out of the box or too much pushing against trope and trying to do something different, it's alienating to them. And as a lifelong horror fan, the horror that, especially in my teenage and entire adulthood, both in books and in movies, the horror that I've been most drawn to is the stuff that pushes against those perceptions or perceived boundaries, pushes in the genre into other places, pushes the genre out of these tiny boxes of what you can do, what you're supposed to do, what horror is supposed to be. And so that's what I publish. So I will go to, if I table at, if I vend at events that are horror writer events, horror publisher events, I get a lot of people who look at my covers, and I mean, everybody's gonna have their own opinions on this, but I'm an aesthetic asshole, so the covers look really good. I care about what the covers look like, and a lot of them are paintings and illustrations. There's kind of a house style in that there is no house style, but it's what aesthetically is pleasing to me. And I'll watch these people with stacks of books, they're buying 20 books from all these other vendors, and they come and look at my books, and it's or the Weirdpunk stuff, and it's I can see the alienation, because none of them are a skull or a spooky I mean, I have a devil on the logo, but not the spooky heavy metal looking devil. They're not a slasher novel, or the things that it seems like the primary mainstream horror audiences are interested in are not what I publish. So I always feel like a bastard within a bastard genre, which might just be my temperament of how I am as a person. This is just comes down to my own sense of self-worth. But it's one of those weird things where I do feel often on the outside of that. And then I go to lit events where I'll vend at big literature or even small literature events. And there are certainly a lot of people who are there who are stoked to find this stuff. But there's a lot of people at those too who also turn their noses to it. Or it's that's not real literature, or that's not worthwhile, or it couldn't have any subtext, or it couldn't have any meaning because it's just nothing but blood and gore. And it's that's also not what I publish. I don't know if I like the word literary horror, because I think that's not really what I mean, but horror that's literary minded, in that what I'm interested in is literature. What I'm interested in is compelling storytelling. What I'm interested in is vision and narrative and atmosphere and tone and all of those things that I got out of the transgressive literature that I grew up reading. Like, I'm a big William Burroughs. When we talk about problematic people, I'm a huge William Burroughs fan. I love fucking Kathy Acker. George Bataille is one of my favorite writers. J.G. Ballard for years was my favorite writer. I don't know. It's a soup that's constantly changing. But like, that's the realm I come from. Even though I'm a horror fan, I didn't read a lot of horror when I was growing up. I read some King. I get why he's famous. This isn't me coming for Stephen King. He's just not my guy. Like, he's not for me. I love Clive Barker, but
Same.
Mostly, right? Like, I love Clive Barker, mostly the early stuff. Carl Edward Wagner, Dennis Etchison, Kathy Koja, like the writers who were taking the form and pushing it into strange and weird and uncomfortable new places. Poppy Z. Bright, aka Billy Martin, like Exquisite Corpse is like a perfect example of a book that takes horror and transgressive literature and crams them together. That's what I think Koja did with The Cipher too, where it's approaching an almost kind of body meets cosmic horror from the perspective of someone who mainlined Burroughs and Acker in their 20s. Like, and it just sings like that prose is so weird and bouncy in a really cool way. And that's like my shit. And so I feel like a lot of that stuff is alienating to standard horror readers. And so I continue to be in that realm of alienating to both standard horror readers and alienating to people who want high literature or the literature that's just about like sad hipsters in New York. I know that was for a while, right? Like just depressed, which I write about a lot of depressed people, but the depressed people I write about are shitty punks in Midwest towns.
I actually do enjoy both of those things, admittedly. I've read about both of those things and do enjoy it.
Yeah, and that's, again, like not trying to yuck anybody's yum. That's absolutely, totally fine. I get it. Because I certainly read stuff that's, I publish stuff a lot of people don't like, but I definitely read some stuff that's like, yeah, I don't know. It's just a top thriller. Like, that's fine. It's whatever people do. Sad people. I mean, I like that. It's just, there's these, people get really stuck, and it's fine because you're drawn to what you like, but people get really stuck in their kind of mode of what they read and get, sometimes it seems like weird about stepping outside of that, which I get because you're putting time into reading, you're putting money into buying. So of course it's like, do I want to take the risk? Does this look good enough? It's like, it's fine. This is just what doing art is trying to convince people to be into the thing that you do, or hope that people get into the thing that you do. But it also, like, I know it's not for everybody, and that's fine. I just wish that I could find more people who were into it, who like get it, because I know they're out there. It's just finding them is the challenge.
Well, that's the thing. Like, where do you think publishing is going? Because now it's like, I mean, just the digital age we're living in, and just getting your stuff out there. And I mean, I feel like, you mentioned these events and stuff. I feel like those are just 110% necessary now. Like, there's just no other way, really, because how else are people going to find you?
Yes, 100%. I'm going to turn this light on really quick.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It's getting dark in the Twin Cities, apparently.
Very dark. Yeah,
the sun's going down.
It's funny because when like 2020, like late 2019. I was like, I had done a few events here and there, but not a ton. Didn't, I do one or two here and there. But I was like 2020. I was like, this is the year. This is Weirdpunk. I'm going to do every event I can. And then COVID hit and lockdown, and it was like, oh, there's no events. And so then in the kind of wake of that, and as things opened up some, I was like, I'm still going to try to do that. I'm going to try to do as many events as I can. And I fail at that sometimes, but I try to do a ton, because that, to me, that's the future. There was a time where I sold a lot of books through Facebook. That really? Time has since passed. Even at the time, people were like, you can't sell books on Facebook. And I'd be like, I am. I don't know what to tell you. And then I would sell some on Instagram. That was never super great for me. And then the same thing with Twitter. A lot of people are like, you don't sell books on Twitter. It just doesn't happen. And I would make posts on Twitter, and I would see sales in my specifically like in the Weirdpunk store.
Twitter
That's all
used to
me.
be a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Twitter used to be an amazing thing.
Yeah.
Twitter used to be the way I sold most tickets to shows.
Yes, I believe that.
It was mostly Twitter. Now,
Yeah,
even before a certain somebody took over, it was getting not as good because they were like anything that had a link they started suppressing.
Yep.
So that made it a little harder. And then, a certain somebody said they were going to solve all those problems. And all of us said, no, you're not. You're going to make it a million times worse. And we were right. Dude made it a million times worse.
Yes, 100%. Even at that time when I was successfully selling shit on there. I was still like, I got to start doing local events or even traveling for events because that feels better to me. Handing a book to someone and having them give you money, like face to face, and you're talking about it and you're talking about what they like and they're talking about what they like and telling them about the books. And I'm excited because I love all this shit. I don't publish anything I don't love. I like really deeply care about these books and I want people to connect with the one or two or 27 that will make sense to them that they might like. So it's sometimes people will be like, what's your most popular book? I'm like, no, what are you into? Like who fucking cares what the most popular book is? What are you into? Or if you're buying it for someone, what are they into? And let's like direct you to the ones that make sense for that. Or if you want to do something completely different, I can direct you towards those. I want to connect people with the things that like they will click with. And that's a million times more enriching to my life, more valuable to me than a sale on the website. And I love a sale on the website. So it's even like, I'm not mad, or even a sale on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or whatever. I'm not mad about any of those. I love all of those, but like face to face, having a conversation, the person walks away, hopefully happy, hopefully gets home in a week or a month or 10 years when they finally sit down and read the book. Like maybe they'll fucking love it and maybe they won't. And I hope they share those thoughts on Goodreads because I want to hear that too. I want to hear you didn't like it. But that's like the best part. And so really, I've really tried to hone in on like doing events, local and national. I've traveled a ton. I've been out east a lot for events over the past few years. But I'm always trying to like do more, but then it like finances, it's hard because travel events that aren't local, it's like you're paying for your table, which is often hundreds of dollars, especially if it's a big event and you're paying for getting there. I usually drive because I'm like, I can bring everything. I don't have to pare anything down. I don't have to worry about, like I could ship it to a friend who's close to there and have them drive it, but then I have to worry about like, how do we get it back to me at the end of the weekend? If I haven't sold it, or whatever I didn't sell isn't going to fit in my bags. So I tend to drive but it's a lot of money, hotel, everything, food. But I love it, but it's like face to face is the best. And I think that a lot of other writers and publishers who I know are feeling that same way. Some of whom are well-versed in doing events and others are like, man, I wish I lived somewhere where that was a thing. But, I think the feeling largely given how bad social media is that doing events in person is the best way to get books into people's hands. I also have a newsletter, which is like curated from people who buy the books online and the people who sign up on the website. And it's more than 1,500 people. And it's, that's fucking really nice too, to have a direct line to people that isn't contingent on algorithm.
Yeah.
It's contingent on their interest and their ability to have the time that day or whenever to like look at it. But even with that, I try not to make it be just this like buy, here's all, buy Weirdpunk. I really try to make it like I talk about what book is recently out or about to come out. I usually talk about friends who have releases coming out, or if a small press I like is doing a Kickstarter or something, I direct people towards other cool shit, because that's like what I care about. Is I want everybody to find the cool shit. I try to focus a little bit on the back catalog, because that's something that small presses largely ignore. I hate back catalog, just letting it linger and die. Like, no, I don't care that a book came out 4 years ago. If it's new to you, like, you might be super into it. I'm super into it, even, years later. I talk about events, and then I usually at the end, I'd like talk about what's going on in my life, or like thoughts that I'm having. And the reception to that has been overwhelmingly really good. I will get people who reply back.
That's awesome.
And a lot of it's like, I'll talk about, like, if I'm having a hard time with grief stuff, and it's not like Dear Diary, and it's not crazy long. It's like a few paragraphs, but, I just talk kind of open. I'm just kind of an open book with that stuff, and it affects the business to a degree, right? Like, I have a book that was my newest book was supposed to be out on the 30th of November, and I'm going to upload it probably tomorrow. And I won't have copies for like 2 weeks. And it's all because, like, with my dad dying a month ago, that really like leveled me in a way that we were prepared for his death, but I wasn't prepared for the way it would level me. And so I've talked about that, and I've gotten a lot of, like, I'll get like 12 email responses from people just being like, thank you for sharing that. Or like, tell me about a person they lost. And I love that. I love that I don't want it to be bye, and there's no sense of like interaction with it. I want to talk to people. I want to share and experience other people and what they're going through. And so that too is like, I'm way fucking better than social media.
Yeah, no kidding. Absolutely. So last question here. And you kind of answered this a little bit organically, but if you want to dive a little deeper, what would you say, how would you describe the intersection between horror and lefty politics? You mentioned, anti-fascist, anti-capitalist.
Yeah.
Talk about that connection.
I think it's the genre, like all genres, have a lot of baggage. If you look at, the history of horror film, especially, but even horror literature, there's a lot of disdain and fear for the other, right, built into the genre. It's like what so much of the genre is the other is scary, be it the other is human or a monster or some thing we can't even quite comprehend. It's fear of the other. And with that comes a lot of white supremacist, imperialist baggage, a lot of eugenicist baggage, which is certainly something that the genre, I think, has, I don't know about tackled, but like has expressed within itself as time has gone on, right? Like movies that directly address that, stories that directly address that history. How many books have we gotten that talk about how Dracula, right? Dracula is totally this. It's like, is that a fear of Roma people? Is that a fear of Jewish people? It's a fear of this kind of vaguely Eastern European other. And maybe it wasn't built to be, maybe the intention wasn't to throw aspersions to certain people, but like you can't help but read into that with history and what was going on when he wrote it. And, just like Lovecraft is full of, obviously. So you have a genre both in lit and in film that's got a lot of like shitty baggage. There's obviously a lot of misogyny in horror films, but also I think it's worth understanding where the idea of titillation plus violence comes from, because that was all a result of the Hays Code in film that said, like, you can show this, but you can't show that. So you can show a woman getting naked but you can't show sex, or you can't show penetrative sex, or you can't, it was like really strict rules that cropped up with the Hays Code, but like violence was okay. So it's still a cathartic release. So it's like, almost like less about, and arguably different creators at different times in different ways, but arguably the thing that it's coming at from is less about like overt misogyny and about titillation plus release. It's just the release instead of, fun orgasm is blood and stabbing or whatever. So the genre has so much, it has all of these kind of little conservative things in it too, right? Little like
sure
problematic things. Obviously we can talk about like the slasher thing with the purity of the final girl. There's all of this stuff. But at the same time, in so many of those same examples, you have creators who were intentionally putting in leftist subtext, anti-capitalist, anti-fascist, anti-war. Tom Savini was and this is like anybody who loves horror already knows this, but Tom Savini was in Vietnam. He was a photographer. He was a war photographer, like for the army. And he took photos of all of this horrific shit. And that informed how he approached, I guess, the display of mangled bodies and dismemberment and whatnot was like his kind of reaction to seeing that, to experiencing that firsthand. So whether we say that has like an inherent anti-war perspective or not, he would say that like that was a big influence on seeing those horrors and having trauma from being a part of that, fed into his creative impulse. And that's like amazing to turn it into something. And there's so many examples of like Romero, of Cronenberg using Marshall McLuhan, like Doctor Oblivion in Videodrome is like a 1-to-1 for Marshall McLuhan. Cronenberg went to the same university that McLuhan taught at. He was really into his stuff. I can't remember which Canadian college it was. But so he's like pulling media theory into a film about body horror, and it works so fucking well. But it also is like evocative and provocative and like makes you think about the image and the body and decay, like physical decay versus the eternal like cathode ray and celluloid. And it's like pulling in all of these ideas. And I just think that like the genre is built for that. It's built for that in a way that a lot of other genres aren't. Because you can do, and any genre, you can do anything. But once you start doing anything in any genre, it becomes another genre where it is labeled, right? Literature can have weeping wounds that never close in it. But, the moment you get a little too dark with it, it's suddenly a horror book. And so it's just one of those things that is so ripe for the possibility of making statements or exploring subjects that are in line with various leftist ideals or perspectives. I just personally can't help but like, I can't separate those things. They're just linked to me, I think, eternally. It's right. like Texas Chainsaw Massacre is like almost arguably about like vegetarian and veganism. It draws a parallel between the slaughterhouse and the like dismemberment and cannibalism of humans. Like it's not, I'm not like digging really deep into subtext that might not be there. It's like on the fucking, you watch the movie and it is drawing these direct parallels. So there's just so much of that in the genre, and it really like geeks my mind. And then so I like, as a writer, I do that. I don't always do that, but like I can't help but come to the work that I create informed by my political positions, informed by my social positions, whatever, like by my economic positions. I grew up Section 8 housing, poor as fuck. That's like probably half the reason I'm a leftist is I looked around and was like, what the fuck? How is this okay? That some people have everything and other people are starving, like going to bed without food was a thing that happened many times in my childhood. And so that part of my life informs my work, even if it's not directly in there, right? Like my queerness, like I'm not fancy, like I'm bisexual man, cis man, but like my queerness and how I walk through the world with that informs my work, just as other people's identities, like across, the intersection, inform how they walk through the world. That informs how they work, what they put into their work. And so I'm really drawn as a publisher to work that does that. And again, not exclusively the books don't need to have some grand statement. I'd rather actually they not have some grand, sweet statement that ends in a manifesto. Like I want books, I want stories, but a lot of the work has political subtext, mostly very personal political subtext, or just very personal subtext. Brendan Vedito, I mentioned before, Pornography for the End of the World, he had childhood lupus. So that story collection has a ton about themes of illness in it, which is all like him directly pulling from those experiences he had as a child. And that's like the shit that I want. I want the shit that's like, maybe not like, you need to mine your trauma for the work, like whatever level people are comfortable with. But I want that stuff that's like you're pulling from your heart. You're pulling from your lived experience. You're pulling from your day-to-day and how you are forced to often, right, under heteronormative, white supremacist, fucking imperialistic corporate hellscape America, or wherever you're from that is impacted by that and the politics of where you live. Like, all of that stuff funnels down into the work on some level, and informs it and informs how we walk through the world. And then sometimes it becomes a weird feedback loop of like, what I'm writing is now informing changes I'm making in my life, which will then inform my work. But yeah, the whole thing is, I love the creative impulse. And I think that the creative impulse is a liberatory impulse. Yeah.
So where can people go to learn more about you? Plug away, tell them where they can get the books.
Yeah, you can buy the books most places online where books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Bookshop. Some of the books are available in various independent bookstores. You can also buy any of them from weirdpunkbooks.com, which I'm the sole operator, owner of Weirdpunk. You can place an order on the website in the store, and I am the one packing it. I'm the one writing the address because I'm super lo-fi, so I don't even use a printer. I write it down. So you place an order, it's me doing everything. I'm also just across socials at Weirdpunk Books, and then myself at Sammy Totep, SammyTotep. If you want to give me a follow or whatever, I'm not on. Weirdpunk still has a Twitter. I'll probably delete that at some point. I no longer have a personal Twitter, but both are on Blue Sky and Instagram, and I think Threads, which I never use. Yeah. I am also on Facebook, but I'll add people I don't know.
Sam, thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm sorry if I ranted a bunch. I've been on I've been on a lot of podcasts, and I just fill space. So I hope it was good.
That was Sam Richard. Check out Weirdpunk Books. 'Tis the season to kind of cuddle up by the fireplace or by the heater or whatever it is you got and read a good book. So please check out Weirdpunk Books and support independent publishing. Music for the 1000 Podcast is provided by Andrew Saxon. Be sure to get his podcast, Baywatching Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review, would you? Wherever you get your podcast, if you could leave us a 5-star review, it would be very, very much appreciated. And if you want to support this show on the sustainability end, you can do so over at patreon.com/Ron Placone. For a Give What You Can level, you get all kinds of cool perks. You get insider info on upcoming films and projects. I got a film in the works and a documentary in the works. You get full stand-up clip, and we do a Zoom hangout once a month. It's a really cool community over on Patreon, and you can join for as low as $1 a month. That's patreon.com/RobLacone. All right, 73, almost to that 3/4 to 100 number. We're almost at 75. We're getting there. And by the way, this is the first publisher we've ever had on the show, which is interesting because the concept of this show was inspired by a publisher. So there's another milestone. See you next week. Hey guys, Ron Placone here. Take your own 1,000 challenge. No, you don't need to interview 1,000 people, although if you want to do that, go for it. Your 1,000 challenge can be whatever you want. Maybe you want to call a friend out of the blue once a week. Maybe you want to read a book every month. Maybe you want to start a different garden every season. I guess that might be dependent on where you live. Look, the point of the challenge is taking on an endeavor that enriches your life in some way, and it can be measured. And then, of course, you do it regularly. That's what 1,000 is doing for me, and hopefully for you too. The main reason for this podcast and every podcast I've ever done is to build community. So take your own challenge. Then join our Facebook group. It's called 1,000 What's Your Challenge? ? That's 1,000 What's Your Challenge ? And post about what your 1,000 challenge is and the progress you're making. All I ask is that people be encouraging of each other's challenges. This is personal and vulnerable, so be cool. There's enough negativity on social media. We don't need to add to it. For those of you who aren't on Facebook, hopefully in the future we'll be expanding to places like Discord, Reddit, but for now, we're starting on Facebook. And again, that Facebook group is called 1,000 What's Your Challenge? See you there.